Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Paramahansa Asatar Sri Srimati Samangra Sesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shri Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shai Mukunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dhama Ki Jai. Mathura Dhama Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dhama Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dhama Ki Jai. Gangamaya Jamuna Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktarinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharani Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskajate Satani. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Samsajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Deva Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Panchakalpatribhischa Kripasindavyavatam Chitanam Pavanevya Vaishnavya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's October 12th, 2024 in Radhadesh, Belgium. And we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, Text 36, the last of the Catur Sloki, which is also Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, Chapter 1, Text 56. Etavad eva jignasyam tatva jignasunatmana Anvaya Vyatirekabhyam Yat Sat Sarvatra Sarvada. Please chant. Jignasam Tattva Jignasunatmana Anvayad Vyaktirekabhyam Sarvatra Sarvada. Anvaya Vyatirekabhyam Yat Yat Sarvatra Sarvada. Etavadeva Jignasyam Tattva Jignasunatmana Anvaya Vyatirekabhyam Yat Yat Sarvatra Sarvada. Ladies?
Etavateva Jignasyam
Jignasunatmana Anvaya Vyatirekabhyam Yat Yat Sarvatra Sarvada. Etavad eva jignasyam Tattva jignasunatmana Anvayad Vyatirekabhyam Yat Yat Sarvatra Sarvada. Etavat, up to this, eva, certainly, jignasyam, is to be inquired. Tattva, the absolute truth. Jignasuna, by the student. Atmanaha, of the self. Anvaya, directly. Vyatirekabhyam, indirectly. Yat, whatever. Syat, it may be. Sarvatra, in all space and time. Sarvada, in all circumstances. The Bhagavatam translation by Srila Prabhupada. A person who is searching after the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, a person who has most certainly searched for it up to this, in all circumstances, in all space and time, and both directly and indirectly. And Chaitanya Charitamrita translation by Srila Prabhupada. A person interested in transcendental knowledge must therefore always directly and indirectly inquire about it to know the all-pervading truth. So I'm not going to read the Bhagavatam purport at all, which is many, many pages, as I asked you to read before the class if you could. Or if you haven't, please read it after the class. I will read the Chaitanya Charitamrita purport. I'm going to read the whole thing. It's not that long, and the end of it is very important and summarizes the whole Catur Sloki, plus summarizes a whole concise statement of our Gaudiya Siddhanta. So Srila Prabhupada's purport, this is again Adi 156. Those who are serious about the knowledge of the transcendental world, which is far beyond the material cosmic creation, must approach a bona fide spiritual master to learn the science both directly and indirectly. One must learn both the means to approach the desired destination and the hindrances to such progress. The spiritual master knows how to regulate the habits of a neophyte disciple, and therefore a serious student must learn the science in all aspects from him. There are different grades and standards of prosperity. The standard of comfort and happiness conceived by a common man engaged in material labor is the lowest grade of happiness, for it is in relationship to the body. The highest standard of such bodily comfort is achieved by a fruitive worker who by pious activities reaches the plane of heaven, or the kingdom of the creative gods with their delegated powers. But the conception of comfortable life in heaven is insignificant in comparison to the happiness enjoyed in the impersonal Brahman. And this Brahmananda, the spiritual bliss derived from impersonal Brahman, is like the water in the hoofprint of a calf, compared to the ocean of love of Godhead. When one develops pure love for the Lord, he derives an ocean of transcendental happiness from the association of the personality of Godhead. To qualify oneself to reach this stage of life is the highest perfection. This next paragraph is particularly interesting. One should try to purchase a ticket to go back home, back to Godhead. So, our International Society for Krishna Consciousness is a transcendental travel agency. The price of such a ticket is one's intense desire for it. The other day, Prabhupada said it was what? That is loyam. But what the other day in the purport, what did Prabhupada say was the one thing we needed? No, that's this. Huh? No, that's the same thing. You're just all saying the same thing in different ways. What did Prabhupada say? Something different the other day. Was anybody here? We actually talked about all different alternatives of the one thing. What was the one thing? I think it was yesterday. Oh, my. No?
I don't know, submissive spirit.
Submissiveness, yes, thank you. Tatvavit for the win. I often think I should have like pieces of burfi for, well, submissive. Do you remember that now? Do people remember that now? Yes? Shaking up the cogs. The price of, so there's different things mentioned in different places. Yes? So yesterday he said the one thing is, what was that again?
Surrender.
No, not surrender. Submissiveness. Sometimes the one thing is said to be surrender. And today he's saying the one thing is intense desire, which is the same as eagerness. Okay. If I ask you this tomorrow, will you remember? Yes, we will remember this. Yes, we will. The price of such a ticket is one's intense desire for it, which is not easily awakened, even if one continuously performs pious activities for thousands of lives. Remember we talked about how we think we're desiring it, and we're not really? Remember this?
Yes.
Long ago when we discussed it? All mundane relationships are sure to be broken in the course of time. But once one establishes a relationship with the personality of Godhead in a particular rasa, it is never to be broken even after the annihilation of the material world. One should understand through the transparent medium of the spiritual master that the Supreme Lord exists everywhere in his transcendental spiritual nature, and that the living entity's relationships with the Lord are directly and indirectly existing everywhere, even in this material world. In the spiritual world, there are 5 kinds of relationships with the Supreme Lord: Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. The perverted reflections of these rasas are found in the material world. Land, home, furniture, and other inert material objects are related in Shanta, or the neutral and silent sense, whereas servants work in the Dasya relationship. The reciprocation between friends is called Sakya, and the affection of a parent for a child is known as Vatsalya. By the way, Vatsa literally means calf. Like in English, we call children kids, which means baby goat. So in Sanskrit, they call human children calves, baby cows. Like instead of I'm going to bring my kids to the zoo, I'm going to bring my calves to the zoo. You're talking about your children. And the affairs of conjugal love constitute Madhurya. These 5 relationships in the spiritual world and the material world are distorted reflections of the original pure sentiments, which should be understood and perfected in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. In the material world, the perverted rasas bring frustration. If these rasas are reestablished with Lord Krishna, the result is eternal blissful life. From this and the preceding 3 verses of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which have been selected from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the missionary activities of Lord Chaitanya can be understood. So Prabhupada is just now he's going to summarize these 4 verses, and he's going to give an encapsulated, condensed version of our Gaudiya Siddhanta. Now, I hate to ask this question. Does anyone remember from the first verse of the Catur Sloki when we were talking about having a concise statement of Siddhanta? Does anybody remember that? And how are we defining Siddhanta? Truth that is what? 3 things. Eternal, transcontextual, and universal. Now that's different from if you're just talking about, okay, did you decide if you want to go to Brussels or Antwerp today? What's your Siddhanta? What's your conclusion? You can use Siddhanta like that. But when we're talking about our philosophical Siddhanta, we're talking about things that are true when? Always. Where?
Everywhere.
For whom? Everyone. In what circumstances? All. Now remember we talked about how we use a concise statement of Siddhanta when we're trying to understand Scripture. Does anybody remember that? We talked about 4 ways that every statement of Scripture and every statement from Guru and our Acharyas can be compared to Siddhanta. Does anybody remember those? Yes?
It's just either Siddhanta.
It is Siddhanta itself, so it's a restatement of Siddhanta. Okay? What else could it be? This is, if you get this, everybody, your ability to deal with confusing or difficult statements from Srila Prabhupada or Acharyas or the Shastra will be greatly enhanced. Yes?
It's applied Siddhanta.
It's contextualized Siddhanta. So you have the universal and eternal, but not the transcontextual. You have a contextualized Siddhanta. Okay, what's the 3rd category? Yes?
It points at Siddhanta.
Points at Siddhanta. Pretty much all your difficult statements are going to be in that 3rd category. It's not Siddhanta, it's not contextualized Siddhanta, but it refers to Siddhanta. It points to Siddhanta. And our last funny category is Kamsa saying, arrest Nanda Maharaj, take away Krishna Balaram's jewels, throw...
Always.
Always? You're going to always take away Krishna Balaram's jewels?
No.
Oh my goodness. Don't let her anywhere near the deities. So what's the 4th category?
It can be applied always.
What's the 4th category of Shastric statements? They're either a restatement of Siddhanta, a contextualization of Siddhanta, pointing to Siddhanta, or against Siddhanta. Are Kamsa's statements against Siddhanta non-election?
Yes.
Thank you. Are they in the Shastra?
Yeah, okay. That's...
Are Kamsa's statements in the Shastra? Are they in the Shastra? Yes. They're in the Bhagavatam, which is our supreme authority. Are all the statements in the Bhagavatam Siddhanta? No. Otherwise, you're going to take away all the deities' jewels. You're going to take away all of Jagannath and Balaram's jewels and wealth and throw them off the altar. Is everybody clear on this?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, I've got a statement in the Shastra. What was the example I gave?
The question of the general question for the 4 points.
Okay, you have a statement in the Shastra. What was the example I gave 4 days ago of the statement in the Shastra? I gave an example from Bhagavad Gita.
Arjuna, get up and fight.
Stand up and fight. Yes, I want to understand what this means. What does this statement mean? Stand and fight.
Do your duty.
Okay, what did you just do? Is that the literal meaning of the statement? Does Krishna say, do your duty, or does he say, stand and fight? He says, stand and fight. What did you do? What did she just do? She reinterpreted it. She didn't restate it. She didn't restate it at all. She interpreted it.
That was wrong then?
I didn't say that was wrong.
I guess.
Did she interpret it? Yes? No? Everybody?
I did.
She did. Thank you. Is that statement, stand and fight, is it a statement of Siddhanta? Anybody else? Is it a statement of Siddhanta? Is it true in all times, all places, for all persons, in all circumstances?
It is not.
Nobody here is standing and nobody here is fighting. So you must not believe that it is a Siddhantic statement. Or else we're all violating the Bhagavad Gita. I'm not standing and fighting either. Is it a contextualization of Siddhanta? It is? No, it's not. It's not something universal and eternal that's applied to a particular person. It's the third one. It's pointing to Siddhanta. So what did Mahalakshmi do? She found something Siddhantic that it was pointing to. Actually, she found a contextualization of Siddhanta that it's pointing to. She didn't find the Siddhanta. The Siddhanta is that by devotional service, we can approach the Lord. A contextualization of that would be, therefore you do your duty. Stand and fight is pointing toward the contextualization, which is pointing toward the Siddhanta. Is everybody following this? If we can't do this, then we're going to think every single statement in the Shastra is Siddhantic. And we're going to get in a lot of trouble. We're going to think that all of us have to be standing and fighting all the time. Now, because we know that that's impossible, we tend to intuitively know that that statement is not Siddhantic. But there's a lot of statements in the scripture that are not that obvious. Or statements by Srila Prabhupada, or statements by our Acharya. And if we automatically think, well, every single thing they say is Siddhanta, then we're going to end up with a lot of trouble. And the vast majority of the statements that we're like, huh, what, are in that third category of pointing towards Siddhanta. We usually can figure out the ones that are opposed to Siddhanta, that we're not supposed to follow them. Sometimes we need guidance for that, like our Acharya is giving us guidance for, what was Krishna's against Siddhanta statement? The Karma Mimamsa, which he spoke to Nanda Maharaj. Yes. See, if we automatically do what Mahalakshmi did, that just means that she's been in the movement for a very long time and she's been a preacher for a long time. And so she automatically makes this adjustment without thinking of the steps she's going through. Clear? Like, we all know how to read, and so when we read, we're no longer understand. We're not doing that. We did that when we were 5. And now we just say understand. Oh, that says understand. Or if we're doing mathematics. Yeah? What's 100 minus 17? Oh, boom, it's 83. How did you do that? You know, it's automatic. But the problem is when these things are fully automatic and we don't understand the processes we're going through, we may make a mistake of putting something in the wrong category. Clear? Clear? And a tremendous amount of our philosophical conflicts in our Hare Krishna movement, a tremendous amount of our practical conflicts, our sociological conflicts, are coming from this. That people are just on automatic pilot. You know, they're thinking because everything in the Shastra is true, that means everything in the Shastra is Siddhanta. Or because everything Srila Prabhupada said is true, everything Srila Prabhupada said is Siddhanta. That's complete rubbish. I've sent you a check in the mail, Prabhupada would write in a letter. Please get it from the post office and do the needful. Is that a statement of Siddhanta? No. Right? And tomorrow, Krishna willing, we'll look at one of these very odd things where Prabhupada appears to say two completely opposite things in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. So, in order to compare any statement from Guru Sadhu Shastra to Siddhanta, you have to know what the Siddhanta is. Duh, right? Okay. So, a Siddhanta, we're talking about Siddhanta again. It has 3 qualities. It's what? universal, eternal, and transcontextual. It's true in all time, all places, to all living entities. Does that sound like this verse to me? A person who is searching after the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, most certainly search for it up to this, most certainly search for it up to this, in all circumstances, in all place and times, and both directly and indirectly. Does that sound somewhat similar? Interesting, isn't it? So I've got to know what the concise statement of Siddhanta is. And every sampradaya has a concise statement of Siddhanta. Now, if you really want to get into a space, then you might ask, thank you. Then you might ask, if we're talking about universal, eternal, and transcontextual truth, why doesn't everybody describe it exactly the same way? We'll also talk about that tomorrow. That's something else you can put on the shelf for right now. We'll look at that tomorrow. So we were talking about a concise, why does it have to be concise? If I'm going to compare anything that I read to Siddhanta, why does my statement of Siddhanta have to be very short and simple? Huh? To be memorable. Also, how are you going to do it otherwise? Like Krishnadas Kaviraj says, the whole 8th chapter of Madhya Lila. Does anyone know what that is? I'm going to have a class on that while I'm here too. Ramananda Samvad. That whole chapter is Siddhanta. But if you were to compare Stand and Fight to that whole chapter, it would be a little awkward, wouldn't it? Is Stand and Fight the same as that chapter? Is it contextualized? It's too complicated. It's too big. It's too complicated. So every sampradaya has a concise statement of Siddhanta. Does anyone remember who I talked about in our sampradaya made a concise statement of Siddhanta? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Das Mula Tattva. And he based that on the work of Baladev Vijabhushana. And he based his on the work of Madhvacharya, as written by his disciple Vyastirtha. So when the Shastric Advisory Council put out our hermeneutics program, and we had to have a concise statement of Siddhanta, and we proposed using Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Das Mula Tattva. But a number of people on the GBC said, well, do we have something from Srila Prabhupada? And well, we don't have a list like that Prabhupada says, this is our concise statement of Siddhanta. We don't have that. So we took quite some time on the SAC to look for, do we have something like that from Srila Prabhupada? Interestingly enough, there is something in, of all places, Light of the Bhagavata, I think it's text 41. Like, who would think to find it there? But one of the first places that we thought to look were in the Catur Sloki, because the Catur Sloki is the concise statement of Siddhanta for Vaishnavas in general. That's exactly what it is, these 4 verses, which is why we're giving some attention to them. So we looked particularly at Prabhupada's commentary on the Catur Sloki. And lo and behold, we found in his commentary in Adi Lila, in this last verse, we found in paragraph form. It's in one paragraph. It's not in a list form. And our Shastric Advisory Council member, Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj, took this paragraph and compared it to Das Mula Tattva and found that it's practically the same, little slight wording difference. And so he took from this paragraph a list of 10 items. And he's written, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, writ a detailed explanation of each of his 10 items. So Bhaktivigyan Swami has been doing that with the 10 items he got from this paragraph. He's been writing, like, I think 7 subpoints and other verses and things like that. So this paragraph I'm about to read is a summary of the whole Catur Sloki, and it is Srila Prabhupada stating our concise statement of Siddhanta. And the way he flags it is what I just read. From this and the preceding 3 verses of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which have been selected from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the missionary activities of Lord Chaitanya can be understood. So this was Prabhupada's flag, that this is the summary. We can understand everything in this summary. Srimad Bhagavatam has 18,000 verses, which are summarized in the 4 verses beginning with Aham Evasam Evagre, 53, and concluding with Yat Shyat Sarvatra Sarvada, 56. So that's the Catur Sloki. Now Prabhupada is going to summarize each of them. In the first of these verses, 53, the transcendental nature of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is explained. Does anyone remember the first verse? Approximately.
It's I.
Yes.
I am everything.
I am everything when?
Always.
Before, during, and after the creation. Okay. 54 further explains that the Lord is detached from the workings of the material energy Maya. The living entities, although parts and parcels of Lord Krishna, are prone to be controlled by the external energy. Therefore, although they are spiritual in the material world, they are encased in bodies of material energy. The eternal relationship of the living entities with the Supreme Lord is explained in that verse. Does anybody remember the second verse?
You see anything of value, but it's not connected to Krishna, then it must be the illusory energy.
Excellent. Anything you see of value, if you don't see the connection with Krishna, that is the illusory energy. That is Maya. Okay, next one. 55. Instructs that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by his inconceivable energies, is simultaneously one with and different from the living entities and the material energy. This knowledge is called what? Achinta Beta Beta Tattva. When an individual living entity surrenders to the Supreme Lord Krishna, he can then develop natural transcendental love for him. This surrendering process should be the primary concern of a human being. Okay, what's that verse? Yesterday's verse.
I'm in everything, but still I'm not there.
I'm in everything, but still I'm not there. Just like the material elements enter into everything, but still they are separate. So in the same way, I enter into everything, and I'm separate. Okay, then today's verse, Prabhupada summarized. In the next verse, 56, it is said that a conditioned soul must ultimately approach a bona fide spiritual master and try to understand perfectly the material and spiritual worlds and his own existential position. Here are the words Anvaya Vyatike Kabhyam, directly and indirectly, suggest that one must learn the process of devotional service in its two aspects. One must directly execute the process of devotional service and indirectly avoid the impediments to progress. So by Srila Prabhupada's giving, you see how he's giving kind of an expanded explanation of the verses? He's summarizing them, and he's also summarizing his purports to them. And by doing this in this one paragraph, Prabhupada's taking the Catur Sloki of the Bhagavatam, and in this one paragraph, he's explaining them so that it covers everything that's in Das Mula Tattva. He's basically restating Das Mula Tattva in one paragraph as a summary of the Catur Sloki. Is everybody following this? Does everyone get now why it's really important to have a concise statement of Siddhanta? What happens if we don't have a concise statement of Siddhanta?
It's easy to deviate.
It's very easy to deviate. And I've heard devotees say all kinds of really bizarre things as Siddhantic. Like they'll say, this is our Siddhanta, and I'm like, what? Where is it in our list of Siddhanta? And they'll usually... oh, that went well. They'll usually take something from category 3 and put it forward as Siddhantic. Is that clear? They'll take something that's just like pointing to Siddhanta and say, well, that's Siddhanta. All right. Yes. Opposed to Siddhanta. Sorry for the trouble. There isn't much in the Shastra and from our acharyas that oppose Siddhanta, obviously, but there is. I haven't counted the number of verses in the Bhagavatam spoken by demons, but there are quite a few. Now, sometimes our acharyas will take those verses and try to skew some Siddhantic meaning out of it. You know, well, they're not really saying Krishna is the lowest of men. They're saying Krishna is one who pushes everyone down, and you know they'll turn the demons' meanings around to at least get something that points to Siddhanta. Thank you so much. So sorry for the trouble. I got too enthusiastic. Yes.
For example, Hiranyakashipu is speaking verses, but they are Siddhanta.
Now, Hiranyakashipu does speak Siddhanta, so it's not that every verse from the demons is opposed to Siddhanta, but there are verses from the demons that are opposed to Siddhanta. There are even verses from God that are opposed to Siddhanta. So you can't say if God speaks it, it's Siddhanta. That's far out in and of itself. And you can't say if the demons speak it, it's opposed to Siddhanta. That's also far out in and of itself. Yes?
Shishupal, for example.
Shishupal is another good example.
Kamsa to Vasudeva?
Well, Kamsa to Vasudeva was speaking Siddhanta. So we do have instances where the demons speak Siddhanta. What do they say? Broken clocks are correct twice a day. So, sometimes Siddhanta comes out of the mouths of demons. Yes?
But we say that Krishna is the absolute truth. Is that in conflict?
That Krishna is the absolute truth. So how can the absolute truth speak something against Siddhanta? But he does.
So
How does he do that? I don't know, maybe you'll have to sit down and have a talk with him about that. Why does he do that? I mean, obviously, our acharyas tell us that Krishna is speaking the karma mimamsa philosophy as a way of moving his devotees away from demigod worship. And, Krishna doesn't go to the devotees in Vrindavan and say, I'm God, worship me. That would disturb their yoga maya, which we talked about the other day. So instead he says, well, you don't have to worship any god, just worship Govardhan Hill. And so we understand those statements in terms of rasa rather than in terms of tattva. And so in one sense, they're pointing to Siddhanta because they're pointing to rasa. But in order to do that, you have to interpret them. You can't, if you take them at face value, they're pointing away from Siddhanta. If you interpret them, then you can get them to point towards Siddhanta. Yes?
I was wondering if Siddhanta is spoken, but it's like Hiranyakashipu. What he speaks is Siddhanta, but it's not complete because he only speaks about living entities. There's no mention of God in there.
Okay, well, Dasmula Tattva has dasa, it has how many points? 10. Not every one of them has God in the word, in the statement. So you can be restating any of those 10 points of Siddhanta. Thank you for bringing this up. You don't have to be restating the whole 10 points. One point of Siddhanta is conditioned living entities are struggling with illusion. If you restate that, you're stating Siddhanta, although you're not stating the other aspects of Siddhanta. So every restatement of Siddhanta, like Achinta Bheda Bheda is one aspect of Siddhanta, but you don't have to state that every time. You could just say Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's a restatement of Siddhanta, without mentioning the other points. Excellent, very good. All right. So, it's interesting that Srila Prabhupada talks about directly and indirectly, in terms of directly meaning what you should do, and indirectly meaning what you shouldn't do. He says it here. Directly execute the process and indirectly avoid the impediments, and he says the same thing in his Bhagavatam purport when he's talking about directly and indirectly. And at the same time, this whole verse and purport is about the fact that in one sense bhakti has no hindrances. It's available in all times and in all places and in all circumstances to all living entities. So this comes down to a very basic question, because the process of surrender, the first two aspects of the process of surrender, are to accept what's favorable and to reject what's unfavorable. So, does that mean that I have to have the right place and the right time and the right circumstances in order to do bhakti? Does it mean I have to be pious to do bhakti? And Arjuna asked a question in the beginning of the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, maybe I should get liberated first and then I can do bhakti. Maybe I should first try to understand the self and Brahman and then I should do bhakti. I just had someone the other day say to me, well, I don't really know if I can practice bhakti. I don't know if I can think about Krishna because I'm not chanting my rounds anymore. So it seems wrong for me to think about Krishna when I'm not chanting my rounds. So what does Krishna say in this verse? He's saying that bhakti is spiritual and has nothing to do with time, place, and living entity. And he's also saying that all religions, all spirituality point to bhakti directly or indirectly. Now it's interesting that Srila Prabhupada makes the point in both purports and in his summary of this verse that one has to have a guru, although that's not stated directly in the verse. So when Prabhupada summarizes this verse, he says you have to hear from a guru, you have to hear from a spiritual master, although it's available everywhere. So it's available everywhere to everyone at all times, and yet you can't access it without help. If you just try to access it without some help, it's most likely not going to happen. It's possible because God is everywhere and he can reciprocate with everyone. But it's highly unlikely if you don't have some help. Yeah.
That's because Lord Brahma was confused, so he needed... Lord Brahma was confused. And
yes, he needed that guidance.
So he got direct guidance. So it's linked.
Yes, well that's why it's implied. Thank you, Ekachakra Grandpa. That's why it's implied. Because this whole conversation happens because Lord Brahma is like, what's going on? I can't understand what's going on. And he required Krishna to act as his guru to enlighten him. So, I mean, it is possible that somebody without having any kind of guide, that Krishna will work with them directly. It does happen. Sometimes Krishna gives somebody mercy directly. But that one shouldn't expect that. And it's very unusual and it's practically impossible. Yes. Mike?
Recently, in the month of May, this exhibit on the Ramayana by Annapurna, her paintings, opened in May, and the catalog that Mahaprabhu published contains an essay by Garuda in which he writes about people in India. There's a certain group of people in a particular geographic area of India who got direct inspiration from Lord Ram to become his bhaktas. I forget how exactly the details, but Garuda makes a section of his article about this group of people because he wants to point out that the Lord sometimes directly inspires people to worship him.
Yeah, it does sometimes happen. Like Robin says, you might get an honorary degree. Now, usually if you get an honorary degree, it's not because you're just sitting at home, eating potato chips and watching detective movies or something. Usually you do something to get an honorary degree. And sometimes it says that Krishna takes the form of one's guru, but generally one needs some help. Okay. So directly and indirectly, what does this directly and indirectly mean? So Prabhupada talks a lot in both the purports about indirect things, right? He talks about what do people consider ultimate happiness. Talked about sense gratification, going to the heavenly planets, impersonalism. He's saying, no, you need to go directly. You need to actually go to the truth. Don't take an indirect way. You need to understand that the Lord is the goal. And one should be one-pointed. One should be always searching. Right? This is Prabhupada's talking about in the Chaitanya Charitamrita purport that we read. What did he say? One should do what? One should purchase a ticket. We're a transcendental travel agency. We're selling tickets back to home, back to Godhead. And the price is our eagerness, our desire for it. We talked about this yesterday, how we might say, well, I desire it. Why am I not getting it? But it's not desiring to go back to Godhead as if it were just some really far out heaven. And often our so-called desire to go back to Godhead is either a bhakti or mukti thing. Like, I want to go back to Godhead because I'm so tired of suffering this material world, or I want to go back to Godhead because I've understood that that's a lot better than Indra's heaven or Brahma's planet, and, you know, I want the best place for my sense enjoyment. And that's not really a desire to go back to Godhead. So therefore it doesn't work. You know, I really want it. Why isn't Krishna giving it to me? He says, because you don't really want what it is. You're wanting something that you've imposed on it rather than what it actually is. So it's a great desire to love and serve Krishna. It's anyabilasita sumyam ganakarma anavritam anukulena Krishna anushilanam bhakti uttamam. It's that we have to have a great desire for. And everything in our conditioned nature fights against that. You know, my desire as a conditioned soul is that I want to be the Lord and I want to be the enjoyer. And I want to have unimpeded enjoyment. Like Hiranyakashipu, he says, I want my rulership and my enjoyment to be without impediments. So that is our deep, deep-seated desire. And until and unless that changes, we can't purchase the ticket. You know, it's like you've got the wrong currency or something. I learned the hard way that except for the major currencies, like American dollars and euros and British pounds and Japanese yen, all the other currencies you have to exchange in that country. Generally speaking, some exceptions. You can change Indian rupees in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, because so many Indians go through there. But like I had the experience of getting rubles in Russia and not changing them into dollars in Russia, and I couldn't change them anywhere. I finally just gave them to a devotee who was going to Russia, and here, take these, you know. Yeah, the same experience. So it's kind of like, you know, you're coming here in Brussels to purchase your airline ticket and all you have is Russian rubles. And they're like, sorry, it's the wrong currency. We don't accept that. We won't change it for you. So if I'm going to buy Krishna Prema with a desire for bhukti and mukti, however much I've disguised that to myself and however much I fooled everyone else in the Hare Krishna movement, it won't be the proper currency. Okay, so we should have this one-pointed determination in all places, in all circumstances, in all times. I am going to purchase this ticket somehow or other. So also directly and indirectly can be directly that the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam is pointing to bhakti and prema, and indirectly the Varnashram system is pointing to it. As we discussed in the 9 principles of career dharma, that one of those principles is yajna. You can't actually have prosperity without yajna. And one of those principles is cherishing your prosperity and field of work, and you can't really do that either unless you have some concept of divinity. There has to be some connection with some concept of divinity in order actually to cherish your prosperity and your field of work. So that, therefore, asuric varnashram, without those things, tends to become exploitive. So that's an indirectly. All right, so there's different ways this verse can be interpreted. It can be interpreted in terms of sadhana bhakti, that the process of bhakti is available to anyone, anywhere, always. It can also be interpreted in terms of pure bhakti or rasa. You notice Prabhupada talked about rasa? That having our relationship with Krishna, having our eternal pure relationship with Krishna is available anywhere, always, to anyone. And we're really going to look at the to anyone. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also says this verse can be interpreted impersonally, which we'll look at briefly. Okay, in terms of sadhana bhakti, sorry, I have about almost as many notes as the purport. Okay, so if we look at, Srila Prabhupada quotes actually this verse in the purport here, that if whether you have all desires, whether you're free from desires, or whether you desire liberation, if you have good intelligence, you'll worship the Lord. That's Bhagavatam 2:3-10. So Prabhupada quotes that here. It doesn't matter who you are, you can engage in bhakti. I mean, Srila Rupa Goswami says that the qualifications for starting bhakti is some taste, some attraction. And interestingly enough, he says not being too attached or too detached. I was having a consultation the other day with someone whose problem is that they're too detached. So, one can be too attached, too much into bhakti or too much into mukti. It becomes a problem. But having said that those are the qualifications, and Srila Rupa Goswami also talks about the qualifications for doing Vaidhi sadhana, that your minimum qualification is weak faith in the Shastra. That's your kanishta qualification. Having said that, really, whoever you are, you can take up bhakti. Even if you're really attached and you have all material desires, like Hiranyakashipu, you want everything in the whole universe, that seems a little excessive to me. I don't know what I would do with all of those pairs of shoes if I had everything in the universe. And a lot to manage. Lord Brahma tells Hiranyakashipu, this benediction you've got is going to be hard to manage. So even if you want everything in the universe, or you want liberation, you want nothing, or you actually want bhakti, you can still take up bhakti. Okay. Then the negative, remember Prabhupada talks about that indirectly means getting rid of the hindrances. So Prabhupada's quoting 2:417, that without worshipping the Gyanis, Karmis, the specialized Karmis, the yogis, the scholars of the Vedas cannot attain any benefit. So no matter what else you do, and Prabhupada talks about in both these purports, people who are interested in just sense enjoyment, who are interested in philosophy, who are interested in mystic power, if they don't actually look for the supreme, they're not really going to get anything. Krishna has this heavy verse in the Bhagavad Gita about everything they do is going to be spoiled. All their fruit of activity, all their hopes for liberation, it's all going to be spoiled. Okay, one can do sadhana bhakti in all places. So in order to do pious works, you have to have certain circumstances have to be proper. Right? Like you can only give pious charity at a proper place and time. You talk about charity in the modes. As soon as you have the wrong time for your charity, poof, it's in tamagun. You can be giving charity to a worthy person for a worthy cause and with respect. You do it at the wrong time. You do it when they're on the toilet, poof, tamagun charity. Immediately. The big problem with Diti, how she got here on Yaksha and Hiranyakashipu, was the wrong time. I mean, Kasyapa, he's the father of Vamandev. Diti's the sister of Aditi. I mean, these are both very exalted personalities. They're not ordinary human beings. They should be able to have very exalted children, but it was the wrong time. So just some little thing about the wrong time, everything's messed up. So in karma, you get your timing wrong, it's messed up. You get your syllables wrong in your yagyas. There's that yagya where, they were doing a yagya to have a male child, and then the wife goes up to the priest in the middle and says, actually, I'd like a daughter. And he gets distracted and he says the mantra differently, and then they get a daughter. Or, let's get some being who'll be the enemy of Indra, and you say the mantra a little wrong, and you get someone of whom Indra is the enemy. You mess, just some little mess up, And you can't do jnana at any time. Again, you have to have a really peaceful place to philosophize. You're not going to philosophize during rush hour traffic on the train in Japan, It's not a very good place to philosophize. The same with performing yoga. Krishna says you have to go to a secluded place, you have to sit on deerskin, you have to look at the tip of your nose and just eat the fruits and roots. And you have to be, celibate without compromise, without being married. It's very particular. If you don't do that, Prabhupada criticizes the Astanga yoga in the cities. Where people, let's have our cup of coffee in the morning and go to yoga class. And then go night clubbing in the evening. And it's not going to work in that kind of circumstance. Right? And then In Prabhupada also in this purport says, everywhere means in every part of the creation of the Lord. The Lord can be served by the senses or simply by the mind. The South Indian Brahmana who served the Lord simply on the strength of his mind also factually realized the Lord. Success is guaranteed for a devotee who fully engages any one of his senses in the mode of devotional service. So I'm sure most of us know this story. This poor Brahmana in South India who he couldn't offer the Lord opulent worship because he was poor. So he just meditated every day. Actually, Prabhupada says in Geneva we should all meditate like this when we chant japa. So he just meditated every day that I've made a beautiful throne for the Lord. I mean, we have a marble throne and you have gold fabric in the back, but that's not actual gold. Actually, Prabhupada didn't want us to use much actual gold. He said it would attract thieves. But in your mind, you can make Krishna a golden throne. You can make Krishna a diamond throne. So he did that. And then he didn't just, like Prabhupada says, usually we worship the Lord with sacred water by mantra. All you sacred rivers, please come into this pot. But he actually, in his meditation, he went to all these rivers. He took golden pots in his mind and went to the rivers, and he was bathing the Lord, and he was dressing him with the best garments and ornaments, and then he was cooking for him, and he was cooking some sweet rice. And he was wondering, has it cooled enough to offer? And in his mind, he touched the sweet rice, or he touched the pot or something to see if it was cool enough. And in his mind, he burnt his finger. At which point, he broke his meditation, and he saw that he actually had a burn on his finger. And then in Vaikuntha, Lord Vishnu starts laughing. Actually, Prabhupada says the gopis, they're always just thinking, how can I make Krishna smile? And Lakshmi Devi says, my dear Lord, why are you laughing? Imagine you're sitting next to someone else and they're like, what are you laughing at? And he said, you'll see. And he brought the devotee in his spiritual form to the spiritual world. There's a very interesting story. Someday I will memorize the name of the city. This is a true historical story, also from South India. So there was a very poor man who was a worshiper of Lord Shiva. And he wanted to build a temple to Lord Shiva, but he didn't have the money. So he decided to build it in his meditation. Meanwhile, a few villages away, there was a very rich king who was also a devotee of Lord Shiva, and he was building an actual physical temple. So these two things were going on simultaneously. This rich king was building an actual physical temple, and then there was this poor devotee who was building a mental temple. And it takes years to do this. And the poor devotee who was doing it mentally also took many, many years because he went through all of the steps of construction in his mind. So the king was ready to install the deity of Lord Shiva in the temple, and then he has a dream, and Lord Shiva comes to him and says, I'm sorry, I cannot be present at your temple on the installation day because on that day I'm going to be installed in another temple a few villages away. And the king was very curious. He thought, I never heard about some big temple construction going on in this other village. What's happening? So he takes his retinue, and gradually he finds this devotee. And he says, where's your temple? And he's like, it was all in my mind. So that's a very, very famous story. Now that doesn't mean we should do things in the mind if we actually have stuff. Okay? If you have real gold, you don't just imagine it. Not that we used to have a physical magazine, I think it was called Spirit, that was printed every so often about the activities of the movement, and in the end of it, it had what we call personal ads. People looking for a husband or wife would write something there, describing themselves. Now that's all on the internet. And so this one devotee had wrote, my favorite first service is to sleep and dream of Krishna. So I don't think you get very good marriage prospects for that. So it's not that if we can actually do physical service, we should just do it in our mind, but we can also combine that. If you're in some circumstance where all you can offer your Lord is an apple, then you can mentally add halva and rice and dal and so many things to your offering. If all you can offer is these unscented roses, which is actually an offense to offer flowers without fragrance. So in your mind, you can also add gardenias and jasmine to the offering. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you can also do both at once. If all you have is a little stainless steel plate, in your mind you can make it a gold plate. So, and actually in worshiping the Lord, one is supposed to worship the Lord both physically and mentally. We're not supposed to just worship the Lord mechanically. So therefore, everywhere and in every circumstance, if you have a lot of money, build a big temple for Krishna. If you don't have much money, you can build a big temple for Krishna in your mind. Okay, and in all time. So Prabhupada brings out the point that karma is done until you get your result. You do your good activity, you get your result, then you stop doing your good activity. It's over. Yoga people practice until they get siddhis, like Hiranyakashipu. He does his yoga till he got siddhis, and then he didn't do his yoga anymore. Right? Jnana is practice until you're liberated. In the Brahmajyoti, believe me, they're not talking about philosophy. They're not talking at all. So, you get liberated, then you stop. But bhakti is practice. It's both the process and the result. So it's practice at all times. And Prabhupada quotes in 2236, in chanting the name of the Lord, there are no restrictions concerning place or time, or restrictions on performance because of impurity. O King, therefore at all times and all places without restriction, men should hear about, glorify, and remember the Supreme Lord with full concentration of mind. Okay. And Srila Prabhupada in this purport in the Bhagavatam quotes Srila Jiva Goswami. He says, Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhupada therefore comments on the word sarvatra sarvada in the sense that the principles of bhakti yoga or devotional service to the Lord are apt in all circumstances. Bhakti yoga is recommended in the revealed scriptures. It's performed by all authorities. It's important in all places. It's useful in all causes. And then Prabhupada also says in this purport, even during the annihilation of the material world, the process of bhakti yoga can be applied. The Lord is worshipped in devastation because he protects the Vedas from being annihilated. He's worshipped in every millennium. Then by all people, Prabhupada says, every person at all ages, in all places and times. Sincerity is the only qualification. Prabhupada says, practice is applicable to all types of people, including the practitioners of karma and gyan. Even those who are the most fallen by birth, even the most fallen by activities, in all stages of life. Who is the example of bhakti in the womb? Parikit, yes, and Prahlad. He gives the example of Prahlad, but Parikit will do also. Bhakti as a child, Dhruva. As a young person, Ambarish, and practiced even in hell, he says. So I'm running out of time, but should I tell you a story about, I'm going to go a little over time if I do this. Should I tell you a story of someone who practiced bhakti in hell? Okay. He actually wrote a book called My Descent into Hell. So it was about this totally flaming, out-of-the-box atheist. Complete atheist. He was an art professor. And in one of his classes, there had been a student who was a nun. She wanted to learn how to paint in the convent. And he told her, don't you dare paint any religious pictures in my class. Nothing about God. So she was just coming to class during the day. She was staying in the convent at night. And she asked all the nuns there, please pray for this teacher. So every day, all the nuns included him in their prayers. So fast forward 13 years. And I think he was in the United States. He was in France for some kind of a convention. And he had some sort of a medical emergency, I don't know, heart attack or whatever. And he was brought to a hospital in France. And somehow or other, nobody was really attending to him. Like he was put in a ward and none of the doctors and nurses were there, and he left his body. Now, when he left his body, he saw doctors and nurses telling him to come down a corridor. He thought he was still alive. He thought he was still in his body, and he thought the doctors, and so he starts following them. And as he's following them, they get weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder, and they start taunting him. And gradually they take forms of demons. And he starts to realize, I've died, and I'm being blessed you, and I'm being pulled along by these demons. And then they start like torturing his subtle body. He said, causing him pain. He said also sexually, subtly, they were torturing him. And it was getting more and more and more and more and more intense. And then he heard a voice that said, pray. And he thought, pray? I don't even believe in God. I don't know any prayers. And he thought, well, do I know anything with God in it? So he started in his subtle body saying, God bless America. And as soon as he did that, the demons started backing off. They started moving away from him. But they were saying, stop that, don't do that, no one's going to help you. You're a terrible, sinful person, who's going to help you? But he was really enlivened by the fact that they started backing off. And he said, can I remember anything else with the word God in it? And he started thinking of any songs or anything from he'd learned as a child, and he started singing them louder and louder and louder. And the demons backed off further and further and further. And then finally some higher entity came to rescue him, and he was put back in his body. And of course, he stopped being an atheist, and he started going around preaching about his experience. And he would talk about how he would go into a church when people were praying, and he would see celestial beings in the ceiling of the church singing along with the practitioners. Anyway, at one of his lectures, this nun heard that he was doing this and came to one of his lectures. And she talked to him afterwards. She said, I'm surprised it took that long. And he says, what do you mean? She said, well, every single day, all the nuns in the convent were praying for you. Amazing story. So one can do bhakti even in hell, Prabhupada says. And non-humans. Okay, Prabhupada also mentions that Ajamil worshipped the Lord at the time of death, and Chitraketu worshipped the Lord in heaven and in hell. He worshipped the Lord when he was acting as the Vijayadhara leader, Sankirtan leader of the ladies' Vijayadhara party, and he also practiced bhakti when he was in a demon body. And then Prabhupada says non-humans. He says even the worms, birds, and beasts are assured of elevation to the highest perfection of life if they are completely surrendered to the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So what to speak of the philosophers among the human beings? So even the worms can do bhakti. I'm assuming that doesn't happen very often. Okay, and Prabhupada says here, this is also in this purport, therefore there is no need to seek properly qualified candidates for discharging devotional service. Let them be either well-behaved or ill-trained. Let them be either learned or fools. Let them be either grossly attached or in the renounced order. Let them be liberated souls or desirous of salvation. Let them be inexpert in the discharge of devotional service or expert in the same. All of them can be elevated to the supreme position by discharging devotional service under the proper guidance. Any person whatsoever and whosoever he or she may be, even the fallen woman, the less intelligent laborer, the dull mercantile man, or even a man lower than all these, can attain the highest perfection of life by going back to home, back to Godhead, providing he or she takes shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord in all earnestness. This sincere earnestness is the only qualification that can lead one to the highest perfectional stage of life, and unless and until such real earnestness is aroused, there is a difference between cleanliness or uncleanliness, learning or non-learning in the material estimation. Fire is always fire, and thus if someone touches the fire, knowingly or unknowingly, the fire will act on its own weight without discrimination. Okay, so that's about sadhana bhakti. Anyone can engage in sadhana bhakti anywhere, in any circumstances. We don't have to first have all of our ducks in a row. And if we wait until all of our ducks are in a row, we may never do bhakti. I'm going to wait until I've got to sit on the bank of the Jamuna during Kartik under the full moon and, like that. Okay, the second meaning of this verse is that our rasa with Krishna can be there in all time, place, and circumstances. And Prabhupada, in the purport we read from Chaitanya Charitamrita, says all mundane relationships are sure to be broken in due course of time, but once he establishes a relationship with the personality of Godhead in a particular rasa, it is never to be broken even after the annihilation of the material world. And Prabhupada also uses the word re-establish in that same purport. So when we awaken to our rasa, then we can have that whether the world is created or destroyed or here or there or up and down or anywhere. Yes, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in commenting on the rasa application of this verse, says the person desiring the highest truth must experience rasa, which produces bliss through meeting and separation. So he's defining the directly and indirectly as meeting and separation. and continues in all places eternally. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is like retranslating the verse into the person desiring the highest truth must experience rasa, which produces bliss through meeting and separation and continues in all places eternally. Which is why Srila Prabhupada's talking about rasa in both of his purports. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says even the impersonalist can understand this verse in reference to Atma and Tattva, that one can understand the truth of oneself in all situations, directly and indirectly, no matter who you are, and in all circumstances. So this concludes our classes on the Catur Sloki of the Bhagavatam. I'm sure that we could have spoken about each of these for a month. So I hope that you gain some understanding of Krishna's giving our concise statement of Siddhanta, in comparison to which we can evaluate all other statements, and then Srila Prabhupada in the purport we read today in the CC, expanding that in one paragraph to basically mirror the Dasmula Tattva, which is based on the work of Baladev Vijabhushana, which is based on the work of Vyastirtha, the disciple of Madhvacharya. So it is very important, if we want to adequately understand and explain the statements of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, it is important for us to understand what is our concise statement of Siddhanta, so that we can compare everything else to it and take our understanding accordingly. If you want to go deeper into that, the Shastric Advisory Council does have an 8-lesson course on hermeneutics and a 280-page book to go into it in more depth for those of you who really like a deep dive. So again, thank you very, very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
You didn't say if there are any mistakes in this class from my end.
Oh, I didn't. Someday I've got to learn. That's actually a Sanskrit verse. That's actually a Sanskrit verse, and I should memorize it. If there's anything good in this class, it comes from my guru and the acharyas. If there's any mistakes, that they're mine. Please take the good and leave aside the mistakes. Hari Parsha always says that in Sanskrit. Sometimes I forget it. So I should really You know what I'm going to do to memorize that? I should write it down and have it with me in every class. And I should say the Sanskrit in every class. And if I do that, then eventually I'll have the Sanskrit memorized. That's what I'm going to do, because I keep telling myself I should sit down and memorize the verse, and I never find the time. So yeah, I need like an index card and to write it on the card. Maybe laminate it. Yeah? Maybe we'll do that. So you're the lamination king here, right? You told me that. But not on green paper. Green paper's we're gonna have to find white paper. So let me see if I can find that verse, and I'll give it to you, and we'll laminate it. Then I'll have it, and then eventually I'll actually have memorized the original verse. Thank you, Tattva. Hare Krishna.